Each speaker will have 15 minutes, reflect from different perspectives, and after the 3 presentations, we will open the floor for discussion. If there is a bit of time, which I will negotiate with Emil, we will have after our round of questions, we will have a final round of your feedback as well. Thank you, Father Manuel. So, please, Vlado, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think I would like to say it at the beginning, because we talked also with Katerina about this, that for me it has been very, have been very grateful for the opportunity to be here, because I think people like me and my generation and younger, we come from a very different perspective, being privileged to live in peace in Europe, where peace has been taken for granted, and even having this privilege, I come from a post-communist country. I was born in Czechoslovakia and raised in this post-communist environment, but had this privilege of living, studying, and working in many other European countries, and that's something extraordinary for us, and extraordinary to listen to the experiences and stories that the other generations have. So I think peace, work, and reconciliation are also about intergenerational encounter, about international relations, and that's very important what also KEK has been doing in this way. But I jump now here to the topic I have been asked to do in 15 minutes, which I usually do in 2 university terms, two weeks block seminar. I teach international security, international relations, so I will try my best. There's been already said today and yesterday that we live in special times now, and what we experience, especially the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has shattered our sense of security. We have taken it for granted for so many years, and now we have to actually think completely differently and from new perspectives. So what does it mean to think about security and peace from the European perspective and from the perspective of us as churches? To answer this, I will try to go through some important issues. I was asked to look at the concept of security. Then I will just briefly go into looking at the generation which actually built this structure of peace and security, and which implies certain obligations and principles for us as a community. Then I will very, very briefly present the EU security architecture and look at the threat of the war that we are facing, and finally outline some moral imperatives for the churches of Europe as we seek to build security for us and our generations that will come. Well, security is something very simple, and my students usually laugh when I start with the first lecture, because they always expect something very deep and extraordinary will come, and something heavy, and it's very simple. And we know already from psychologists and medical scientists that we are already born with a sense of security and protection. Already in the bellies of our mothers, we develop some sort of a sense for security and protection, and so we come actually in this world with this sense of having security, protection. And I think that's quite extraordinary, and that's why this definition is so simple, because there is nothing. There are many books. You can go into many different definitions of security, understandings of security, and how we look at it. But I still try to emphasize that it's one of the basic needs. That's why it's actually so simple and so important for us, because every human being, every society needs security. But the problem is when it comes to the question, how do we gain security? How do we obtain and reach secure environments? So, of course, some people try to gain security through the control of power, through competition, through accumulation of weapons, of territory, because they think that in doing so their security will increase. So that's this the so-called realist perspective of security, and the self-interested and motivated actors, states, politicians who go this way, they perceive all the others as a threat to their security. And there is no trust in this world. It's the world of the Cold War, it's the world of all dictators, of all people who think and live in autocratic ways of political space and regimes. But then some other people, some other groups of people, especially through experience, they found that actually security, it's not about competition, and it's about trying to actually regain something from someone else, but it's about cooperation and interconnectedness and cooperation based on some mutual goals. And even if there are disagreements, we can always reach a way to work together to ensure that our societies and people in our societies can live in security. So this other group of people and societies which build their security systems and regimes on the principle of cooperation, they think more about human beings as such rather than the state and the state borders, which are usually the objective of the protection in this other group from the realist perspective. And I find it very extraordinary that the idea of security as a shared responsibility rooted in cooperation and interdependence was well understood by the founding fathers and mothers of the European Union, of Europe, that we have lived here for so many decades and have been granted this security and peace. After the devastation of the Second World War, these European leaders came together with the ambition to build a secure and peaceful Europe. And each of these visionaries, and there are of course many more of them, but there are just few I picked up, Churchill, Adenauer, Monnet, but also some women, Klompe and Well, many others, they contribute with ideas that actually nowadays form what the European Union is. There are many ideas which haven't been put into practice. Churchill's proposal for a joint or common European army is still being discussed. He stated very clearly that in order to prevent future war, Europe needs to have an army. And some others, of course, opposed his idea. So they were also not in agreement with many different aspects. They discussed, like we are discussing today, and as many others politicians would discuss in the years which would then come. And so gradually, actually, the European Union was created from the ashes of the Second World War, with these different ideas coming together and creating space where security and peace was possible. The vision of this idea was also shared beyond Europe. I mean, I'm here to talk about Europe, but I will very briefly mention that, of course, the United Nations was based and built actually on this very similar principles. And then the ideas and principle of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of states, and of course self-determination and protection of civilians were put into the international law, so that based on these principles, cooperation between and among states of the United Nations was possible. And in this sense, actually, the global order was created. But what was very important, and I think what we sometimes forget about when we think also about the creation and the establishment of the security order after the Second World War, is that there were certain preconditions. And one very important, which was very clear for Churchill and Adenauer, but also others, was that true and lasting peace has non-negotiable precondition. Before you can build, you must first overcome the ideology that seeks to destroy it. And it was very clear for them. It was not only about the victory of the Second World War. It was what actually the keynote speaker already mentioned. It was also about the ideology overcoming, and some others today actually, also our colleagues and friends from Ukraine, they mentioned it many, many times today. I heard it. It was also about overcoming and combating this ideology of Nazism. And this was a huge process. It was a process which was not only typical for Germany, but for the entire Europe and for the entire society, where we came together in a reconciliation process, which we still are leading today. The French-German, German-Polish, and the European reconciliation process is still going on, and we are part of it. It was very important as a way to build a democratic and free Europe, a Europe which was built on certain principles of mutual understanding and support, which would then overcome this ideology. And of course, many other ideas, I will not go into it because we don't have much time, but at the end, out of this comes this idea of European security, which is interesting. It took quite a long time actually to come to something which we nowadays call common European defense and security policy, because the first and most important security guarantee that Europe has been given is, of course, the security guaranteed by NATO. Central to this European security governance is the collective defense under Article 5, as we know, and assurance of this transatlantic cooperation. The second important aspect of European security is and was OSCE, which, based on the Helsinki Accords, as we heard today, was a way to actually find out a way of cooperation with the Soviet bloc, which still is nowadays in European space, and focuses more on conflict prevention and rebuilding, but it's not about collective defense and collective security. And that's where many scholars would say that this is a failure of this long process of cooperation and finding a way of cooperation in terms of security and defense with the Soviets, and then later in the post-Cold War era with the Russians. Alongside these organizations, the EU has, of course, expanded its role as an independent security actor, but only very, very slowly. The idea of common security and defense policy was born, but it hasn't been fully implemented as it was envisioned. So in principle, what CSDP nowadays does is deploying EU peace missions, military and civilian. Even those military missions are not truly military. They are training missions. I went to Mali, so those are pictures I took in Mali, and you would not find tanks, you would not find military vehicles. There you would find a military hospital. There are some other cars where you can drive and do observations and training. It was actually a military training center in Pulikoro near Bamako. And there has been a lot of criticism, of course, from the US, but also within the EU, to expand this CSDP policy so that the EU itself can become defense and security actor in a proper sense. So that was the proposal of the Lisbon Treaty. So we have this option now in the European Union since 2009, but we haven't been able to move forward in a very concrete way.
I'm sorry, there's something wrong with the mic. No, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. I will not discuss much about this. There's a lot of research done on this and a lot of discussions still going on. But still very important to look at something which has been missing in this structure was a proper agreement or proper structure and governance between NATO and Russia in this post-Cold era. We had the Helsinki Accords, we had many other agreements. Almost every decade there was something, an agreement, a gradual process of step-by-step trying to reach a more collective security with Russia. There are two very important agreements which I would like to mention. They were mentioned already today, the Budapest Memorandum and NATO-Russia Founding Act, which again repeat only something which we already know, which is already written in the UN Charter. And I would, you have it there, but I would like to cite it into nowadays reality. Ukraine has the sovereign right to be independent. Full stop. And we do not need to go into further discussions. That's a right given to every nation, to every country in the world. Already because of what happened in the Second World War, so we embedded these principles into the international law, and we again try to bring these principles into new agreements, which again just confirm what has already been embedded into the international law. 1 minute, okay. So the threat of Russia today. Well, I would just say that, of course, when Russia invaded, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine was perceived as a conventional geopolitical conflict, but it's not only about this. It's also something which was already mentioned about the ideology and the imperialistic doctrine which has been promoted. There has been this spiritual, theological backing of the Church, of the Moscow Patriarchate, and of course, the use of non-conventional forms and weapons and techniques. We see it also that Russia has been expanding its influence in the seas and also in other parts of the world. So when you look back now to the Sahel region, where 2014 I was there, 2014 and 15, the French were there and they were celebrated as the victors who came to rescue the country from the terrorist occupation in the north. Now the French Europeans are gone into the entire Sahel region, and the Russians are in. They are also there in not only in the military terms, but they are also there in economic terms. They took over the uranium and gold mines. They took over the media, so the anti-European propaganda is being spread in African countries, and they are continuously doing it in many other countries alongside China. And it's something which is, of course, expanding the threat of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and as being perceived also as a threat for Europe. And last thing I was asked to comment was, what can the role of churches be in this very difficult security situation which we face now in Europe? Well, I think first and foremost we need to speak with clarity and with moral clarity. So we need to speak against this war which Ukrainians are facing, and we need to speak loudly. We need to reach to our politicians. We need to stand in solidarity, and not only stand, but to act in solidarity with Ukraine, and support Ukrainian people as much as we can. And that's our task. It has been already mentioned many times today, so I will not go into other aspects, but what I think is very important, I think you will be talking about this, is also already envisioning some sort of a pathway for lasting peace. And also what you mentioned in today's presentation, that's very important, that we already look into future, how lasting peace in this region and Europe can be built. And this will, of course, at some point also include a stronger cooperation also in defense and security with Russia, in order to prevent this conflict. And many other aspects, which I'm not going to talk. I will give to.
Thank you. And yes, please pass the microphone to Marek.
Thank you very much. So thanks first of all to Kek, to Katarina for the kind invitation and introduction. Also at this panel debate, as you know, I work as policy advisor for EU external relations at the Secretariat of COMECE in Brussels, where we enjoy really an excellent collaboration also with Kek on many different issues, and of course the main one is the participation in this Article 17 dialogue with the institutions of the European Union, so a dialogue with the policy-making world. This will be also a bit the focus of my brief intervention, and of course with respect to the European Union. Before I come to that, I would like to make a short reference to the overall theme of our gathering here in Nyborg, the concept of citizenship in Europe today. As we also heard, there are different definitions, different understandings of the concept of citizenship, a legal one with duties and rights, an administrative one that has to do with the practical aspects of everyday life, passports, ID cards, and so on. A cultural one that has to do maybe with one's own identity or identities. A political one that has to do with the participation in the political life. And myself, I would like to base my considerations on an understanding of a citizenship that places the emphasis on responsibility. Responsibility, how we as citizens vote, how we consume, how we treat our neighbors, how we care for creation, how we build peace, and how we also contribute to the common good at the local level, national level, and also at the level of the European Union. And this brings me now to look at the European Union currently, and as we are in Denmark, and Denmark is holding the EU presidency currently, I would like to have a very brief look at the key priorities of the Danish EU presidency, and I'm sure several of you may have looked at the program of the Danish president. You will see two priorities. First, a secure Europe. Secondly, a competitive and green Europe. So two priorities which can be summed up: security and defense, and competitiveness. And these are not only the priorities of the Danish Council presidency, but we can say that they correspond very much with the main priorities of the whole EU that the EU has set for the next 5 years in its strategic framework. So if we look at the program of the Danish presidency under the heading of Secure Europe, we can read that the Danish presidency wants to work towards an EU that protects European interests by strengthening resilience, robustness, and deterrence, by speeding up the European defense industry and production, of course, continuing to support Ukraine, also militarily. But interestingly enough, under this heading of a secure Europe, the Danish presidency also speaks about reducing the flow of irregular migrants, speaks about strengthening Europe geopolitically, progressing with EU enlargement, and also upholding a European community of values. Under the heading of competitiveness, the Danish presidency wants to focus on the one hand on the negotiations about the next long-term budget of the European Union. Some of you may know that the EU operates with a 7-year long budget, and the current one will expire in 2027. So just now before the summer, the European Commission presented a proposal for the next 7-year long budget, 2028 until 2034. And so now the Danish presidency is the first one that starts the negotiations between the different European institutions, the Council, the Parliament, and other priorities in this area of competitiveness are for the Danish presidency to carry forward the so-called simplification agenda, so to ease the administrative burden for businesses, to be, again, more competitive, to strengthen the European single market, to also strengthen the trade capacity of the European Union, and finally also to continue pursuing the green and energy transitions. So now, how to look at these priorities of the Danish presidency, but also, I would say, more broadly of the European Union currently from a perspective of a European Christian citizen. I'm stressing a perspective of a citizen, because I'm aware that there may be also different perspectives. I would like to base, let's say, my approach, my perspective on a recent paper of COMECE. It's a reflection paper, so again understood as a contribution to the current debate that our COMECE Commission on External Relations elaborated a couple of months ago. And let's say as a first take, while doing this analysis of the current priorities of the EU, the paper suggests indeed looking at the founding vision of the European Union, of modern Europe, as Vladimir already elaborated on that. As we know that most of those personalities, of those statesmen, women, that were at the beginning of the European project were inspired by Christianity and by its values of human dignity, solidarity, subsidiarity, precisely by this vision, by this ideal of overcoming violent conflict through cooperation, through reconciliation. And so we can say that those values that are enshrined also in the treaties of the European Union, in the Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union, can be seen as a certain description of the identity of the European Union, of the European peace project, but we can also say that they should indeed serve and continue serving as a compass for orientation also today and in view of facing the future challenges. It has also been said that indeed today the European decision makers are confronted with challenges to uphold these founding values, this founding vision of the EU, and to maintain their credibility and the credibility of the European peace project. So in this regard, what we are suggesting in our paper is to apply the principle of creative fidelity. What does it mean to be, on the one hand, faithful to the founding vision, principles, values, so fidelity, but at the same time be creative, to apply those values and principles to current times, to current challenges, current opportunities, and in such a way renew, let's say, the commitment to the founding vision and the values. So now applying also this principle of creative fidelity to the two big priorities of defense and competitiveness, how could we evaluate them from a perspective of a Christian citizen? As has been said, I think the current world realities really justify placing a stronger emphasis indeed on the security and defense dimension. Also in Europe, as we have heard, and we just need to switch on the news every hour, there are reports about possible threats, possible attacks, even against European Union member states. So indeed we can say that the risk of a military attack against ourselves, against the European Union and its member states, has increased. When we look at the world realities, we see that especially the US is also turning its attention away from Europe, rather looking at other regions of the world. So I think this all should indeed prompt Europe and the European Union to be more serious about our own security and defense. So on the one hand, we can say that there is indeed a legitimate need, and it may also be considered responsible to take it more seriously. But such an approach, let's say, emphasizing the importance of security and defense, is not without risks. And now I would like to highlight 5 risks especially that maybe from our perspective we see a bit missing in the current discourse that is very much a mainstream discourse on this issue. The first risk that we see is the risk of losing sight of the actual objective, because so much emphasis is being placed on security and defense that it risks becoming an end in itself, an objective in itself, and kind of forgetting what it should serve, which goal it should serve, and clearly also from our perspective the goal should be peace. So understood in this way, yes, security and defense could be seen as one of the means, but that should be, let's say, placed at the service of peace. And in this regard also we see a bit as problematic portraying investments in security and defense as a major driver for Europe's competitiveness, because very often the emphasis is also placed on this, on supporting the European defense industry, on creating jobs also in this sector, which may be true and which may be some positive aspects, but this should not be the major motivation also, let's say, for Europe, for European decision makers to make these decisions, and this should also be reflected in their public communication. The second risk that may be there with placing, let's say, too much emphasis only on security and defense, may be to foment, to foster a mentality of fear and distrust. And we know, also coming from our Christian traditions, that a lasting peace cannot be built only on mistrust, on fear, on deterrence. So indeed, while there may be a need, while we may accept that there is a need for a stronger engagement on security and defense, we and Europe must not forget also about initiatives that foster trust, that practically break this possible cycle of violence that would be there with only, let's say, violent options. Here, as Comesse, we also are promoting the concept of preemptive peace building. So to build a peace preemptively in a very, let's say, proactive way, non-violent way, at a very early stage where, let's say, the seeds of a potentially violent conflict can still be managed in a non-violent way, so that indeed we avoid situations where the only possible option would be recourse to force. The third risk that may be there also with such a approach as we see currently is the risk of abuse of power, because we know weapons have a certain power, destructive power, that can be abused, be it by states, be it by corporate actors. So that's why, hand in hand with reinforced investments in security and defense, there has to be also reinforced control of these investments, of these initiatives, to ensure, on the one hand, precisely that consistency and that coherence with the objective of peace, but also to ensure compliance of these efforts with the principles of necessity, adequacy, proportionality. A particular mention in this regard, when we speak about control mechanisms, is also called for with regard to the new defense technologies. Already we mentioned in some discussions AI, these new technologies that are finding their way more and more also into the defense sector, and indeed there is also an increased need for control mechanisms. Fourthly, just very briefly, also the risk of financial instability, because if you look at the way how these new defense investments should be financed, mostly we talk about new debts. We know already during the COVID times, also European Union member states have to assume new debts. And now again, with these investments, you know, the way the option that is there on the table, how to finance them, is assuming new debts at both European levels and also national levels. You may have heard about the SAFE initiative, where the European Commission also is taking up a loan and then giving it further to the member states in the amount of 150 billions of euro, and then at the national level, member states are allowed to increase their deficits, let's say, and by this way increase the defense spending by an amount of 650 billions of euros. So also here, I think attention needs to be paid in order not to trigger another financial crisis. And then finally, the fifth risk that I see in this regard, and let's say this is maybe the most important one that I would like to also formulate maybe positively, is not to forget that peace and security are not only built through force, but require an integral, a comprehensive approach. So I think this is also crucial to embed the current discourse about fostering security and defense in a broader vision of peace, in a broader approach of peace. A very concrete advocacy demand that we are making in Brussels is the elaboration of a European peace strategy. We know that there are different sectorial strategies on security, the security compass, the global strategy of the EU, but something like a European peace strategy that would also clarify the concept of peace, the understanding of peace, and that would indeed outline very concrete ways how to promote peace in a comprehensive way. Something like this would be missing. I mean, yeah, if I may, in the remaining maybe 1 or 2 minutes, brief words about the other big priority that is currently there, competitiveness. Also here, there have been some important reports presented in Brussels. Maybe you have heard about this so-called Draghi report that was presented and elaborated by the former Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi, that indeed stated that Europe is lagging behind in terms of technology, in terms of innovation, in terms of economy, with regard to the other global powers, and it needs to become more independent, it needs to become more competitive. Again, here, on the one hand, we may see the legitimate need for Europe to also step up, to develop, let's say, some capacity for certain autonomous action. But we also see some risks, no? The big risk is what has been also mentioned before, the risk of falling into isolationism or into certain narrow visions, egoistic visions, promoting maybe only self-interests. What we are here trying to introduce into this discourse, as Comese, is the concept of relational strategic autonomy. On the one hand, yeah, indeed, there may be some harmful dependencies on the others that then can be exploited by some hostile actors. So indeed, also Europe needs to reduce its strategic dependencies, but while doing that, it needs to remain open to relations. It needs to remain open to engaging with the wider world. And here I would mention especially two aspects that Europe should also avoid while pursuing, let's say, this agenda of competitiveness. On the one hand, this pursuit of competitiveness of, let's say, geostrategic economic interests should not go at the expense of Europe's commitment to human rights and environmental standards. And this has to do a bit with what I had mentioned at the beginning, the so-called simplification agenda that also the Danish presidency wants to promote, to decrease the bureaucratic, let's say, requirements for businesses, to make it easier for them to pursue business activities. But unfortunately, what is currently also under negotiation is to diminish the scope of the so-called European Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive that would oblige businesses to also undertake strict requirements with respect to the respect for human rights, the environment, and in the name of promoting competitiveness, there is a risk that maybe such standards for companies could be diminished. And the second risk in this regard is the, let's say, risk to endanger EU's historical commitment to solidarity, because also here with the definition of the new economic foreign policy goals of Europe, we see a focus rather on regions in the world where the EU sees a certain geostrategic or economic interest. And then moving away maybe from regions that are fragile, that are vulnerable, that really need also the support and assistance. And so this would be also the second, let's say, aspect that Europe should also avoid while pursuing its competitiveness agenda. So concluding on this, I would just say that, yeah, there could also be a positive way how to look at competitiveness, not to compete against the other, but to compete together with the others. So a positive notion of competitiveness in order to pursue, some common goals, to work for something good together, rather than compete against each other. And then let me just maybe finish with one thought about EU enlargement, as we just had the session before. EU enlargement also features among the priorities of the Danish presidency. There it is, as I mentioned before, under the heading of a secure Europe. So what is emphasized also in the Danish presidency priorities is the geopolitical dimension of EU enlargement, which of course is valid, true, and there is also for sure an economic perspective. But I think from our perspective as churches, what should be in the forefront is the aspect of hope. A hope for the citizens of the candidate countries for a future EU enlargement, as we know that have been struggling for peace, justice, freedom, but also hope for the citizens of the current EU member states that should regard also EU enlargement as a source of enrichment from a spiritual point of view, cultural point of view. And I think here, when it comes to the role of churches, this is precisely also one of the important roles that the churches can play in creating such spaces as we are having here these days, also with regard precisely to the candidate countries and their citizens, where they can come together with the citizens of the current member states and can get to know each other much better, because when we also draw the lessons from EU enlargements, we can say that in the European Union we have achieved quite a solid degree of political and economic integration, but what we have not achieved is a true European spirit, precisely this, knowing each other, knowing each other's histories, historical experiences, identities, worries, and I think here this is also an opportunity for the churches. I would end here, and thank you very much.
Just to say, the paper that Marek referenced can be found on the website of Comesa if you want to look into the details. And we're very happy now to continue with Ralph.
Yeah, Christian Citizenship and Public Policy Initiative Rethinking Security. We are inspired by the Jubilee campaign. Perhaps a few of you know this. I was a co-creator and co-leader of this campaign in Germany, and there was a theme of high indebted countries of the global south in the 90s, and it was called totally naive to indebt this highly indebted, to cancel the debt of these highly indebted countries. But we collected some 2,000 organizations, mainly church organizations and NGOs in Germany and in 50 countries of the world, a lot of more. And so we made lobby and advocacy work to the G8 summit in Cologne, and we reached canceling of debt for 40 countries in the world. So if we are working together as churches and NGOs, yeah, we can achieve such a goal. And yeah, we started really at the bottom with parishes, and then regional churches, and then national churches came in. So that was the way. So that is the power of Christian citizenship I am experienced with, and that's my vision for our future as well. We are inspired as well by the peaceful revolution 1989. So you see on the right side Heiko Lietz, he was a pastor in the GDR, and he cancelled his being of a pastor because he saw the church is too near to the government in Eastern Germany, and so he quitted his job and he started to organize the national peace conferences of all the basis peace groups in Eastern Germany. And then together with a lot of others, of course, Christoph Siemer is a supporter of our initiative as well. He was superintendent in Dresden that time. They achieved that it was a non-violent revolution, and so Heiko Lietz was on the central round table as well, and he was in the negotiations for the German reunification as an official delegate of civil society. And out of these achievements, Christians in the eastern and western part of Germany, they founded, for instance, 1992, this ecumenical service Shalom Diaconate, which was called to train professional civil peace workers for being really peace workers in whole the world. And I had the luck to lead this association for 9 years. So it's a real, they were the first in Germany to elaborate curricula for full-time civil peace workers. And that had an impact. So today there are a lot of associations doing this work, even state organizations. We refer as well to the German Bishops' Conference paper, Peace Paper 2024, Peace to this Household. They have a lot of written to other themes, of course, but we refer to this. Political reason and human solidarity demand an end to the arms race. International and verifiable arms control and a drastic reduction in arms spending. We must counter the horrific visions of a humanity tearing itself apart with powerful images of successful coexistence of peoples and peoples, like you have mentioned before. Against the backdrop of climate change, broad and effective international cooperation is required in a way that has hardly ever been seen before in the history of mankind. So the Protestant Church of Baden in 2013 had this decision, like the national phase-out law from nuclear energy production, a scenario for the medium-term exit from military peacekeeping must be drawn up. So just to open up our discussions to accept military, but to say as a church in the middle or long run, we have to overcome this military security policy. And as an initiative, we refer to a lot of hope, positive examples. We focus on positive examples of history, like the Öland Isles between Finland and Sweden, Do you know that nearly 100 years ago, 1918, there was nearly a war between Sweden and Finland on these isles? Because who owns this isle and has his military on these isles? He can dominate all the Baltic seas. So in that times, they were nearly enemies and not big friends like today. And the isles belong to Finland, but 90% of inhabitants feel Swedish, speak Swedish, and they belong for 300 years to the Swedish kingdom. So we heard yesterday of these circumstances here in the area. So the international community really fought with the governments and said, don't start war about it, don't solve this conflict with military means, but be creative. So the isles belong to Finland any longer, but they got a real big autonomous status to feel like Swedish or like an own state. So it was a very creative solution. We also refer to positive examples from the global south. So you know all Somalia as a failed state. But who knows that in the northern part of Somalia, 3 women started in 1995 negotiations with 60 warlords. And after 7 years, they gained really a new constitution for this part of the country, and since 30 years you have more or less peace and security in this part of the country. Because of this new constitution they found with each other. And the German and Swedish Protestant churches, they supported these women through connection of these women with women in India and Kenya who did similar work, and to finance a 3 months meeting for the new constitution with 3,000 delegates of this part of the country. So if we are doing more of this work, we are really a strong church. So we published a scenario 2018, rethinking security from military to civil security towards 2040. And under others, the former Bishop for Foreign Affairs of the Protestant Church in Germany, Martin Schindehütte, he was very enthusiastic about our scenario. What is scenario about? To go from the nowadays time in the future and not only think in trend or negative scenarios like our newspapers are offering us today, but even to think in positive scenarios to create a positive future. And we focus the whole scenario on existing positive examples. They were collected in Germany in an action plan of the federal government, which was upheld 2004, and 10 years later there was a big evaluation how 30 projects in Germany, in Europe and in Africa developed in this 10 years time. And we said, okay, if we develop this whole project up to 2040 with really strong support, we could have another world. So to give you a short impression only, we said, okay, 2018 we published. It will take some 7 years that the military spending will even be higher every year in Germany, because our new thinking will take time to change the society. But we said this 7 years we will use to convince our Eastern European partners to come in negotiations with Russia again, like we had in the 1990s or 80s. And then we said, okay, in the most positive scenario, we need some 5 years to come really to a new treaty with Russia, like we had after 1990, where we had a disarmament of 90% of our weapons in Europe. And a lot of more, I just call here only the big points. So ideal, we have in 2030 a mutual controlled disarmament with Russia, decreasing investments in arms later on, and the strengthening, so that was the main idea, not to put 80 billion of euros per year as Germany in military defending in an own army, but mutually to change this money to strengthen the international cooperation systems like UN, like OSCE, and so on, to create mediation centers. And so we could have 2040 a paradigm shift. We developed as well 5 pillars of such a civil security policy: just foreign relations, sustainable development in the EU's neighborhood, international security architecture, resilient democracy, and conversion of the armed forces to an international police, to come from national armies mutually to international police. We had translations into 6 languages of our scenario as well, Polish and Russian. And we invited neighbor countries to do such a work as well. So first, National Council of Churches in Netherlands started such a group, and they published 2024 last year, an own scenario for the Netherlands, and the Austrian fellowship published in 2023. So we have their association of 40 NGOs and churches called Abfang in Austria, who are officially supporting our initiative. There is a big, strong Rethinking Security initiative in United Kingdom as well. In France as well, they just founded an own association for it. It was following a colloquium we had, for instance, in Paris with church leaders of Catholic and Protestant church there in 2022. We already are developing such scenario groups in Western and Central Africa. There the process is guided or chaired by Marino El Koyara, who was for 7 years defense minister of Central African Republic, and he's Catholic, and he really realized if we are always thinking in military defense, it's not the future. We have to change in civilian and police defense, and so she is guiding our initiative in Africa. We have now in Germany, Europe, 150 supporting organizations. So here you see some of the supporting churches, 6 Protestant regional churches in Germany, but as well the Mennonites, the Quakers, Church and Peace, and from the Catholic side, Pax Christi, and the IKD Peace Bishop Friedrich Kramer is supporting our initiative. And even the Bonhoeffer-Niemöller Foundation is supporting, because we have heard of Bonhoeffer a lot in these days. We have another cooperation partners in Germany, so 14 Catholic dioceses, the Justitia et Pax Commission of the Catholic Bishops' Conference, Christian academies, Christian parishes, 8 agencies, the Christian lobby offices in Berlin, Peace Logic scientists, and federal associations of mediation and nonviolent communication, and from this year on, the 3 big unions of Germany are cooperation partners. We have as well a lot of cooperation partners in Africa. So I here mention just a few: Peace Institute of the Federation of Central African Bishops' Conference, Association of East African Bishops' Conferences, African Union, Commission 7, Peace and Security, Ecumenical Peace and Reconciliation Councils of several countries, and the African Platform of Traditional Opinion Leaders. We understand ourselves as a dialogical initiative. So we develop papers for our supporting organizations and cooperation partners, the churches, the peace movement, our societies and politics. And we ask for feedback on our impulse papers, which enriches our next paper. That's the main idea. So we have, for instance, as dialogue partners, the best representative of our German Bundeswehr, the Inspector General, or the German Federation of Scientists, where I could present our initiative together with Konrad Reiser. We have a long-time expert dialogue on international police and global domestic policy, with, for instance, UN policy, the highest trainer of all the worldwide police missions of UN. He is very engaged with us and even the German University of the Police. And we published their booklet about the path, possibly positive scenario from national military to international police. We have a long-time experts dialogue with the Munich Security Conference as well. We have politicians. So here you see some of the party leaders of the Green Party, of the Social Democrats, but as well the foreign and defense experts of the Christian Democrats. We are in exchange. We had one big lobby campaign for the national budget to not lower the budgets for civil instruments, peace instruments and conflict prevention, but to do there more, and that was really in 2023. We gained a big success in this. So now we are facing the war in Ukraine. We acted and reacted for that with impulse papers. The first one was for a determined and level-headed response to Putin's war. It's as well accessible in English. So the main thinking of ours, we got it from the training for professional peace workers. If there's any violence, you have to say a clear stop. Stop the violence and stop justifying violence. There is no justifying of violence. We have to say it to Putin and as well to others in the world. But on the other hand, it's not only enough to say stop, but you have to reach a hand to keep relationship and to say, if you change your behavior, we can become friends as well. So this both-handed policy is the main attitude. And we developed it under others with Professor Friedrich Glasel, a very famous peace and conflict scientist from Vienna. So to give you just a short introduction, there are more steps, of course, to face President Putin with clarity and consistency, with clear language and determination, like the UN General Assembly does and like NATO does and we all do. But to send signals of de-escalation in the same time. So stop and this. Through offering inclusive peace and security order in Europe, which we haven't built since 1990, where we agreed to build it. And to offer a new joint controlled disarmament, because Putin said 2001 in the German Bundestag, if we disarm more, you can expand NATO. I have no anxious if we disarm. But then United States started to build military in Europe again, and so we are now in the escalation of military again. So as an initiative, we are invited by several Protestant academies in Germany to discuss the peace ethics facing the war in Ukraine. We are focusing on the scientific logic of peace. So I can't present it now, just the main idea, the difference to logic of security, where the evil is every time in the outside. The logic of peace says the main topic is violence. Stop violence and look on the complex conflict behind violence and your own parts of responsibility that this violence could happen. So on our own part, we could change the best. We could not as much change the other behavior, but our own behavior. And so, for instance, a long-time chair of Munich Security Conference, he said, yes, the West should confess that we have responsibility to Ukrainian war as well. It's not justifying the violence there, but if you want peace, if you want to change the dynamic, you have to look on your own shadow as well. The white paper Christian Citizenship from our Danish fellowship here. Yeah, it says a citizenship which asks where the ones in power abide to the rule of law. That's important. But we say, look on our own shadows, yeah, the Western countries have not abided the rule of law internationally since decades. And so we had in our dialogue with the Munich Security Conference such a theme, and they published last year a big paper on the Western double standards concerning the international rule of law. That was a big achievement of our initiative. And the head of the Munich Security Conference had a big article in this famous international foreign affairs about this. Now we published a new positive scenario, Europe's role for peace in the world. I can't propose it now totally, but only one aspect. I will show you The science in Germany, the peace science, say very clearly our biggest mistake was that after 1990 we did not push more for the establishment of a common inclusive security system in Europe. So we propose to create a UN-secured peace zone for the state between NATO and Russia, primarily for the Ukraine, if they want. For Russia, preventing Ukraine from joining NATO is one, if not the central goal of the war. For Ukraine, its sovereignty with viable security guarantees is a decisive goal of its defensive war. So you see here a map where the countries, green and yellow, there could be a UN-secured security zone, and so we would have a new European security architecture. Yeah, I close now, so I read not this, you can read afterwards. We have as well proposals for a security conference in the Middle East, which we could present, for instance, to the foreign minister of Bahrain in the Munich Security Conference. Our UN security guarantees for Ukraine, we propose to Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, who is chair of the Defense Committee of European Parliament. The next morning, she took up this idea in the German television, and as well the leader of the German Social Democrats in European Parliament, the foreign minister of India, various politicians now, the chair of the foreign committee of the German Bundestag and others we are talking with. With military as well, the chair of the German Academy for Security Policy, or with NATO General Meade from London. We had public media, a lot of articles on this idea. Okay. That's my last. That's my last. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
But please share with us the PowerPoint because you have a lot of links.
Yeah,
We
share.
All participants. There is obviously a lot of material in all three presentations, and I wish we had much more time, but I would like us to have at least one moment of exchange because we have you all three here. Please come back. It's such a pity that we don't have more time. Thank you all, really. So, I see you on one hand there.
You start with that.
Yes, thank you so much for all three presentations because the topic is really hot topic, I would say, not only for Ukraine. So I've got three questions for all presenters. So starting, I would be short. With Lado, I'm thinking about your last slide about what can be done. What can you think it can be done in practice, and what kind of education did you mean? Second, for Mr. Marek Misak, I was really struggling with how do you call it? Sorry, peace building, preemptive. So, what do you mean by that on practice? Because we were trying to establish conflict prevention system in local territorial communities for years, but it doesn't work so much all the time. So maybe you've got some tips how to make it work. And for you, Mr. Ralph Becker, I'm really, I don't know even how to express my emotion, because sometimes I really struggle with UN Security Council decision and NATO, and truly I don't believe it's possible to stop violence and to offer peace again to Putin, because we were trying to offer and to get nuclear weapon, and it doesn't work. And I assume that if we keep offering all the time without only stop, that would be different Europe in several years after. So maybe there is something more of ideas how to stop violence. And it reminds me a lot of talks with our pacifist Christian movements in Ukraine. Unfortunately, all of them left before February 2022. So all the talks, all the tips they've got us, they said, but of course you should leave the country because it's the only way, and then stop violence and offer peace again. I am assuming not 40 millions available to leave the country in one day, and what should we just leave the land? So I'm really struggle with this issue. How should we stop it, and what kind of offering can be? And I really feel it's like a track security moment. Thank you.
I would like us to pay take 2 more questions, and then we give some space to. I think Father Paolo first.
Thank you for all your presentation. It's somehow pretty close to my heart because I'm working as well for the, especially for the military chaplaincies. First question, maybe to all of you, you can choose who feel better to answer. How do you see then the role of the military chaplains then in this peace movement? And then maybe, I think Tatiana, she already said a more diplomatic way the question I would like to ask, but maybe to Ralph. I was really struggling with your presentation, to be honest, because especially in the presence of our Ukrainian friends here, I think that was not really, let's say, very diplomatic to about such a questions, especially discussions with Mr. Putin. And I was thinking just, what was the reception of this scenario within the society? Because you can talk to all the generals, but we have no feedback. So the feedback was positive, and I'm wondering if this positive scenario or just unrealistically naive.
Thank you. And one more question from Father Manuel, and then we give the floor back to the panel.
Yes, so possibly to Marek and to Ralph. To Marek, I liked very much this concept of creative fidelity. That means that one sees the founding fathers of the European Union, what they wanted, what they accomplished, which was something that was really difficult. So putting together Germany and France, creating conditions for war to be impossible in Europe again. And they did that very courageously. So how can we apply that sort of spirit today? So I think this idea of creative fidelity is very important also for theology. How do we interpret our dogmas today? So maybe you can elaborate a bit on this, because I think this is very important. And then you said that you were seeing, you went through what are the priorities of the Danish government for this presidency. And then you said you were going to, how to interpret these as a Christian citizen. I think it's very important for all of us. And it's our work maybe in the European Union. We see the policies and we try to interpret them with a Christian spirit. How do we discern these policies? So I think these are 2 things important. It's not a question for you, it's more a reaction to what you said, because that's a bit the spirit of Commissaire in some way. And then to Ralph, I think you put there a document of the German bishops, Catholic bishops. I think that was before the war in Ukraine. I don't no?
2024. And I said they expressed a lot of more words for military support and so on, but this as well.
Yeah, but I think now, after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we are in a new era. We are in a new era. So I agree that maybe we could ideally think of a change of paradigm also in Russian ideology or in Putin. We can hope and pray for this. But I think we have to do this having arms to deter him.
Dr. Bano, beg you to keep your responses as brief as possible.
Okay. I believe that there can be hardly lasting security in Europe while there is a major power, Russia, still having this imperialistic worldview. Many examples from history, not only the Nazi Germany, but many other examples where we learned in this conflict that this imperial thinking needs to be defeated, needs to be gone, and it needs to be replaced by a democratic, positive thinking. We heard today in the experience of democracy in Russia. That's a big story for another lecture. In concrete words, this aggression cannot be reverted. So it's very difficult to propose direct talks. What I believe, what it's probably more important, I know that in your work also you are doing, proposing this, is negotiation through other partners which have leverage over Russia. At the moment it's actually China, India, some other countries, the US as well. but also with this condition that this aggression cannot be rewarded, because this is going to destroy the entire world order and the system of the principles which we embedded into the international law. So there's be a huge question over this body of international law, what happens there, which was built, and it's very different also to imagine that you can then start building actually reconciliation, which is going to be very important for the future and for the future of Europe and this common vision of this vision of a common security and defense system, which needs to be envisioned already now, but also with these preconditions, which I believe are very important. So the role of churches, there was the concrete question is, I mean, I said already, speak with clarity. Also, to talk to our governments, what is possible to do. To support Ukraine in any possible way. The defense of civilians, the defense of people, is the obligation and the priority of every state. So Ukraine has the right to defend its people. It's the right given to every nation, to every community, to protect own people and providing these victims with of aggression with support that is needed is also very important. Many other aspects which I didn't mention, but I would go to something which we heard in the keynotes speak. That's what comes also from my other research. We talked yesterday with Gladys Garniel in Ireland and also with some other colleagues in the UK. Is that what the churches can really do is engage in societal peace processes. So not trying to be in this track one diplomacies and peace negotiation is also very important, and there is also a role of religious leaders at some point to play, but it's much more important for us to engage in societal peace processes, to bring people together. We meet here as officers, as representatives of churches, but it's much more important that we bring our people from our communities and our churches together cross-border, and nowadays it's possible. So that's one of the aspects, and there are plenty of those which I also have done in my research, which I would encourage churches to do. And for you?
I can follow. Yeah, so first on the concept of preemptive peace building, I can just say a few words on also how this concept came about. It's already some years ago, in the year 2016, when the European Union was designing its current global strategy. So next year it will be 10 years, maybe also an occasion to update it. But at that time we introduced this concept of preemptive peace building in one of our contributions. And indeed, if you read the global strategy of the European Union for foreign affairs and security policy, you will find a small chapter called preemptive peace. And then we had the chance to talk to the drafter of this global strategy at that time, and she confirmed that this chapter and this notion has indeed been taken up from our contribution. And it's also one of the chapters, I think, in the global strategy that has, in the years after, received rather little attention as compared to the other chapters of the global strategy, particularly also on security and defense and others. So in short, how we as communists understand this concept is indeed, I mean, to be proactive, to step in at a very early stage. The first step to that is the analysis, to a profound understanding of the local context, cultural context, also religious context, which we think is often not done. And here precisely I also link maybe the first question with the second. When it comes to the analysis of the local context, also the policymakers should rely much more on the key grassroots actors that are, let's say, that are in the grassroots. Many of them are faith-based or linked to churches, to religious communities. They remain in the field during all the stages of a conflict cycle. So I would mention as a concrete initiative or concrete idea with regard to preemptive peace building, this one is one example, to much more proactive engagement with the grassroots actors. What we also mentioned in our contributions, mechanisms of early warning, early action. If you are interested in other, let's say, a list of other possible initiatives, there is a very helpful report of the European Parliament that also maybe didn't get that much attention because it was just adopted just before the end of the previous mandate of the European Parliament. It was adopted in January 2024, and it's called something like a report of the European Parliament on the role of preventive diplomacy. And there is really a list of very useful, I think, initiatives. Indeed, it mentions also the role of churches, of religious communities, as mediators, as actors for peace. Maybe this is also something that we, in our different contexts, could take up and promote, because, as I said, it was just adopted before the European elections, just before the party started to campaign, and it got rather little attention. Here, this I would also link maybe to the point that also Father Manuel mentioned about the Danish presidency and our role also to interpret the priorities of the presidency or of the EU policymakers, and to contribute to the policy making as Christian citizens. Here I would like to mention a bit the articulation between the European and the national level, because we are here, I think, representatives of both, of the, let's say, European level, as CEC, as COMESE, that work in Brussels with the EU institutions, and you are, in your national context, working with your governments. And I think also Vladimir hinted on it, and those who follow EU foreign and security policy more closely know that actually almost all the decisions taken in this area of security and defense have to be taken by member states and in unanimity. All of them have to agree so that these actions can happen, so that I think there is a role for both of us, for us in Brussels, of course, to maintain this dialogue with the Parliament, with the Commission, with the Council, but our leverage, let's say, over the Council is a bit also limited, and there I think we count very much on your interactions with your national governments, because indeed every one of your governments has a say in Brussels, and can indeed block or positively contribute to the decisions taken at the European level. And I mean, the concept of creative fidelity, I think it's indeed something that can challenge us, can bring us to further reflection how to apply it very concretely. Maybe I will just now give one example because of short time, but what we mentioned in our paper was to also try to apply the method of Schuman to the realities of today. This method of Schuman of turning instruments that can be used for war into instruments of cooperation. And here, at that time it was coal and steel. Maybe nowadays we can also look into areas like digital infrastructure, energy, and so on. But of course, this is, I think, something that we can also discuss in the follow-up.
So, as Initiative Rethinking Security, we accept military defense. And of course, Ukraine has the right to defend itself by military means. And of course, we have the right, and I say the duty, to support Ukraine in military defense. So our initiative isn't saying stop the military defending of Ukraine. We are saying stop violence, and the military support is one part of this sign of our Western communities to Ukraine and to Putin. Stop your violence. But we say that makes only sense if you take the other hand as well. And therefore we are thinking about possible solutions, because what is a responsible behavior and attitude to this war? All the Western countries, the NATO countries, they agree to go not with own soldiers in this war, because then you have a third world war. So if you agree to that and accept that we won't not become a clear war part on the military means on the field, then you can only support your Ukrainians to stop Putin now more or less on the line which is there. But Putin will only with this, we have this since 2 or 3 years, there's more or less the same line, like in the First World War, and Putin will not end his war. And that's our analysis, which we propose for discussion. We have the tools, but we invite to discuss about this. If we analyze that Putin, and he is telling it every week, and his foreign minister as well, to prohibit the NATO membership of Ukraine, if he doesn't want it, and he doesn't accept only Western security troops in Ukraine, and the Ukraine is asking for security guarantees, And we are in the West now thinking about Western military to give these guarantees, but Putin is every day saying, I will not accept only Western guarantees. Then let us discuss about UN guarantees, because the BRIC states, India, South Africa and Brazil, if they are coming in, it's something like worshipping the global South, the BRIC states, and not the Western dominance any longer in the world. And so we see a possibility, not a guarantee, but a possibility to offer this to Putin. And perhaps you don't know, Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, who took up our proposal and was very constructive and positive in response. She is in Germany and in Europe, she is the main fighter for more weapons for Ukraine and so on. So she is in a totally other thinking, but she got our idea and said, yes, I will bring it into the discussions. And as well the leader of the German Social Democrats in European Parliament, who is as well a member of executive board of the Social Democrats in Germany, René Repasi. We could talk with him 1 hour, and he just got the idea and said, I will support this idea, I will go for it. And as well the leader of the peace committee of the Social Democrats in Germany. We had a long talk with him, and he said, I will organize that you will be invited to the German Bundestag, that we will have common public discussions with the Christian Democrat leader of the foreign committee of the German Bundestag. So we are just planning these discussions, and of course the military people say, okay, that's a sensible proposal, but that UN defends such a big country like Ukraine, it's very difficult because we have no structures. Only NATO has these structures to come very fast in this, many soldiers and so on. But then we say, okay, but that's a failure in the thinking, because Putin will not accept that NATO coordinates this security guarantees. So we have to be creative, and then the military says as feedback, okay, that's a politician question, I can't answer. I can only tell you out of military perspective. Yeah, that's my answer to your questions. And the invitation, let's talk about this. But what is the alternative? It's a long year going war, and that's for your Ukraine fellowship. It's not a positive hope scenario, isn't it?
Thank you all. Obviously, we haven't finished talking. We need to continue this exchange. I want to thank all panelists, and we are staying in touch with you for future encounters. And give the microphone to Emil.